So my rule of thumb is there's three things you should basically never do using media if you can possibly help it. And they're interrelated. And my three are trust, creativity, and conflict. The more you navigate conflict together successfully, the more you build trust. The more trust you have, the more you're able to take the risks that lead to creativity. But creativity often generates unexpected results which lead to conflict. Like they all go back and forth. And I actually think if you do those things together, many other things, you can build systems that mediate in different ways and make it more efficient and scale and all the things that modern work requires. But you've got to do those things in real time with the real embodied person who will give you information you can't get any other way.
Hey there, welcome to the Culture Keepers podcast. My name is Kara List and I'm your leadership coach. And here on the podcast, we discuss topics that empower you as leaders to develop connected workplace cultures where your people feel valued, seen, and heard. And today, I cannot tell you how excited I am. There are no adjectives, no good adjectives to describe how I feel to have Andy Crouch on the podcast today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Andy in a minute, but before I do, I want to talk to you about one way you can pursue connection that is easy, that is something you can do every single week and will absolutely make a difference in your workplace culture. And that is how you begin your staff meetings. And listen, I do not mean a cheesy icebreaker. No one likes cheesy icebreakers. This is not that. What I'm talking about is a way you can, in 10 minutes, really get to the good stuff, the place where people do feel valued, seen, and heard. And that can happen week over week and build upon itself. And that is with your staff meeting kickoff. And so I have a guide for you. It is 4 things you should absolutely do in those first 10 minutes every single week. And you can grab it. It is free. I want you to have it and use it. Go to www.heykaralist.com/kickoff or go ahead in the show notes and click on the link. So today we have the gift of Andy Crouch talking about pursuing culture, creativity, and trust in the workplace. And let me tell you a little bit about Andy. Andy is an author, musician, speaker, and a highly respected thought leader in culture, leadership, faith, and technology. He's authored several books that I love, to include Culture Making, The TechWise Family, and The Life We're Looking For. He is a partner for theology and culture at Praxis, a venture-building ecosystem for founders and entrepreneurs across all sectors and around the globe. And that is a 3-sentence bio that doesn't even scratch the surface of the influence and impact of Andy's body of work and just who he is as a human. We had this incredible conversation, and I cannot wait for you to hear it. So let's jump right in. Hey, Andy, welcome to the Culture Keepers podcast.
Thank you, Kara. Very glad to be here.
So glad that you're here. So I had the opportunity to interview Andy in person, which I feel like is something we don't get to say very often these days. But 2 years ago in Houston, we got to have at a leadership conference an onstage conversation that was so great. So I'm so thankful, Andy, for you taking the time to come onto the Culture Keepers podcast and share just who you are with us and your contribution to the world through your awesome work. It is an honor. So we have a couple things in common. We love the sound of music. We've established that in previous conversations.
Yes.
And it was
this is capital letters, the musical. The musical,
as
opposed to we love the way music sounds. Or something
well, both. I think we could agree to both. But we particularly like the musical, The Sound of Music. Precisely. Yes. And I was so funny how this just happens. I was, obviously planning to have this little intro. And I was in the car this morning with my kids. And, when you play a song through Apple Music or whatever, and it just kind of populates whatever the next song is. Right. And my favorite things, Julie Andrews, like the original recording comes on, and I just was beaming. I was just in my minivan, cruising down Central, just like, yes, those are my favorite things too, Julie. Like just brings so much joy to my soul. So we love the sound of music. We're both musicians. We love music. We're from Pennsylvania. Are you originally from Pennsylvania?
I am only for the last 20 years. I was not, not born and raised, no. But I'm married to someone who was born and raised here, so close.
Okay, yes. So I lived in Pennsylvania from the time I was 9 to 21.
Yeah.
A good chunk of time.
Years.
Yes, very formative years. It's my home. My hometown is in Pennsylvania, and we both have a passion for talking about culture.
Yes, indeed.
And it's your book. In
this podcast, we will somehow combine The Sound of Music, Pennsylvania, and culture.
And it's going to be awesome. We can do it. If anyone can do it, Andy Crouch can do it. Yes. So I really kind of discovered your work through your book, Culture Making, which you published how long ago now? When was that book released?
15-ish years. It came out in 2008.
Okay, 2008. So it's a fantastic book. I will link all the things, obviously, in the show notes. But Andy, I'd love to hear just about how you kind of got to the place you're at today. I know it's a long journey and story, but in terms of your passion for culture, specifically on this podcast, we talk a lot about the importance of workplace culture and the responsibility of the leader to build connected workplace cultures. But just from your vantage point, like how have you gotten to a place to be a voice, such an influential voice on culture?
Well, speaking of formative years, I would say it began for me with a move when I was 13 years old. I moved from central New York State, where my father had been teaching at a university there, but we lived in a very rural part of New York, south of Syracuse, New York. And we moved to the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts, which is what I consider my home, because I went to high school there after we moved. And I was plunged into this very different world, from kind of rural, small town school to a big suburb of Boston, fairly affluent, high education. For me, a pivotal time. I grew in all sorts of wonderful ways during those years of high school, but it was kind of my first big cross-cultural experience. And I bring it up because you don't know culture until you've been displaced. So culture is the taken for granted environment around us always. And you don't discover what you've been taken for granted until you move out of it. And I sometimes say your first encounter with culture, actually, the move was a very, very big one for me, and is for a lot of people. But it's actually kind of the first time you go over to like a friend's house when you're a child. And you walk into this home, and it probably looks something like the house you live in. But the longer you're there, the more you realize these people, my friend's family does things differently from my family. And it's your first encounter with cultural difference. Even if that friend, like the world would look at the two of you and say, oh, you're the same ethnicity, or you're the same race, or whatever. But even, between two families, there's a different culture. And so for me, this started kind of with the shock and the requirement to adapt as I moved, starting high school, trying to make friends, completely new place. Then I did it again when I went off to college. And in particular, in college, I encountered a completely different ethnic culture in that as a musician, I ended up apprenticing in the Black church. I'm white, and had a few encounters with sort of Black gospel music, but ended up working as a musician in an AME Zion church, which is a historically Black denomination. And there's a whole musical language there, as well as many other forms of culture, that I had to be I was an absolute beginner, but I was very motivated to learn. And that community was incredibly gracious and welcoming, as anyone would find going into a Black church. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be Black to go to a Black church. They'll be incredibly open in ways you might not even be able to imagine if you're not from that culture. So that was like those were the initial experiences that got me aware of this. And then I spent 10 years working with college students in a campus ministry environment, so a kind of Christian religious environment at Harvard University, which is not a Christian religious environment overall. And these were students at Harvard with lots of potential and lots of talent, amazing, amazing people at a very formative stage of their lives. and what they're preparing to do. What you're preparing to do if you go to college, it's one way to do this, is to make a contribution to culture. You're learning some piece of your cultural tradition. If you're studying chemistry or studying business or, whatever, you're embedding yourself in part of culture. And the goal is to go out and be part of it. And so that's kind of the deep background of what got me thinking about it. And Culture Making was a book that came out of those 10 years of walking alongside, kind of often literally having conversations while walking with students who were trying to figure out their path in the world and what they were called to do. And I just felt like in the end, the one way to describe it is you are being prepared to make culture, to actually create culture. And you're not just being prepared to consume culture, which is so we live in a consumer society where even if you think about how we entertain ourselves, at the end of the day, when you've done your work and the dishes are done, or at least the dishes are in the sink, what do you do for entertainment? Well, until 100 years ago, the answer was you make music together as a family, or you tell stories together, or you just talk, or you play games. And now, if I judge by walking around my neighborhood, mostly what people do, there's a blue glow in every home at 8:30 at night. And there's lots of little blue glowing things too. Now people are double screening it, right? and what are we doing? We're letting someone else has made culture. It's now coming in through these screens and we're absorbing it. But the book Culture Making was really about I think the human design to be contributors rather than just consumers. So I hope that's a helpful arc from the beginning to that moment of writing that book.
Yeah, that's great. And there's so much I want to dive into, but I'm gonna take my time
Yeah, sure.
getting there, because that just makes me want to jump to your more recent book. But we're gonna get there eventually.
Yeah.
So there is so much data about how people would prefer. They would rather stay in an employment situation with a company organization where the workplace culture is thriving and healthy, where they feel valued, seen, and heard, but they're making less money, where the salary isn't great, maybe even the benefits aren't great, than the opposite, right? Where the salary is great, even competitive benefits, but the culture is lonely or toxic even. Yes. That's clear. That is not a surprise. We live in a very lonely time for many reasons. It's a national health crisis, like officially, right? We know this information.
Yes,
it's out there. As workplace leaders, like we have a privilege and a responsibility to make cultures or create conditions for culture making, so that people can feel connected. I often say that if you do nothing else as a leader, make as many connections as you can throughout your day, right? That is, you will not ever walk away regretting that. You may walk away regretting other things, other priorities, but you will never walk away saying, I spent too much time connecting with people and helping them feel recognized and seen, valued, and heard.
Wow.
But there are threats to workplace culture. And so what would you say are the greatest threats to a thriving, healthy, connected workplace culture in 2024?
Oh, wow. Well, the number, that's in one way, it's easy to name the number one. And it's excessively mediated relationships. So media is originally from a Latin word that means the middle. So the medium is something in the middle between people in this case. And you and I are having a mediated conversation, and your listeners were mediating it, right? So if we were in the same room, we could have the same conversation maybe, but we happen to be in different rooms, in fact, different time zones. And so we're mediating it. We've got microphones, we've got headphones, we've got a screen so that we see each other, though hopefully your audience doesn't see me because I didn't change out of my sweatshirt today. I was like, this is not a video podcast, is it?
It is, but that's okay. It's both.
Okay, well, fine. Well, I'm wearing my...
Come as you are.
Wearing my Praxis gear, the company I work for. Media is tremendously helpful. I mean, it facilitates all kinds of things, including conversations like this. But I would say our workplaces and many other aspects of our lives are at incredible risk today of excessive mediation, which is essentially too much in the middle between people. And the biggest problem that creates is that all media shrink information in order to make it transmittable. So in data terms, we call this compression. So part of why we're able to have this high fidelity conversation is actually in ways that mostly are imperceptible to us. The signals, just say from our voices, the audio signal is being compressed down to a very small bandwidth. And I'm seeing you through a little window on my screen. Now, what that means is we're able to do this with, I don't know, megabits per second of information bandwidth. If we were together in person, the amount of information we'd be exchanging through channels that we're both aware of, like hearing and seeing, but channels we're probably not even aware of, like proprioception and the mirror neurons in our head that fire when we see another person that we recognize doing things. Our own neurons start to fire as if we were doing that. And it would be like terabytes of information going back and forth, like 1,000, 1,000,000 times more. And what you get when you have that full bandwidth experience, also known as being there in reality, as opposed to virtually, is so much more detail about what it feels like to be the other person. And I got this from a really interesting engineer and roboticist named Rosalind Picard, who is at MIT. And interestingly, she studies how computers interact with emotion. And Roz said something to me years ago that has changed my life in some ways. She said, emotion is our primary cognitive resource. So the way that so cognition is how you navigate your way through the world, making sense of all the information you're getting and figuring out what you should do next. How do you do that? I think a lot of people, if I say, what's your primary cognitive resource? They'd say, it's, thinking about things. Or they might say it's my AI assistant that I turn to when I need to think about something. In fact, your primary way of making sense of the world, and importantly, the other people in your world, is emotion. Now, by that, I don't just mean, something like tears or, that sort of thing that probably ideally doesn't come up that much in the workplace, though there's a place for that in the workplace and everywhere. But it's all the range of embodied response that before you can think through why you're feeling it, you're feeling it. And when I'm with you in person, I feel almost instantaneously much of what you're feeling. And frankly, you can't even prevent me from feeling it. As much as you try to regulate how you present yourself, I pick up information that if you were just texting me, which is the ultimate mediation, because it's down to just alphabet characters, right? So it's the smallest possible bandwidth is a text message. I have no idea what the emotion is on the other side of that text message. But when I'm with you in person, I feel that whether you want me to or not, and frankly, whether I want to or not. But it becomes this incredible treasure trove of truth about who is this other person that I'm with and what does it feel like to be them. When we, for the sake of efficiency or other goods, mediate all the communication, we miss out on most of the cognitive resource. And cognition is ultimately about deciding what to do. So it's about taking in information about your environment and charting a path. And that's what work is in a way, right? So by overly mediating, and so this is by sending text messages instead of picking up the phone, by picking up the phone instead of getting together in person, by sending a memo instead of walking to the other person's office. There's so many ways that this can happen. All of these can be useful and efficient in some sense, but if we do that all the time, we miss out on what it's like to be each other. So that, I could give you other threats, but that is absolutely the number one threat.
Yeah. And with that too, it's like there's the beauty of human connection, right? Like there's what we get from it, but also assumption is one of the biggest threats I have found in workplace relationship, thriving workplace cultures is this idea of, when we only have the text message, when we only have the email, we don't have emotional context, then our brains are really good at immediately deciding that person's intention and that person's motivation.
Yes. We attribute something, but whether it's true, we don't have the feedback loop to check that. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I think, is it Hanlon's razor? Is that what it's called? The idea of the judging of the intention. And then there's like the fundamental attribution error, which I talk a lot with leaders in this, that we perceive a behavior and we immediately attribute it to their character, right? As opposed to their circumstance. So when someone cuts us off in traffic, we think they're a jerk, but we don't know why they cut us off. It could have been an accident, but they could have a family member in the hospital that they're rushing to. We never do that to our side of the communication because we can see our circumstance.
Exactly.
Right. And
so good.
I love this idea too. I was listening, I don't even remember who it was, but they were talking about the idea that you can never see all sides of a sphere. Right. And so in order, if there's a sphere between you and me, the only way I can learn about what your side looks like is by asking. Right. Is by listening to you describe it, because otherwise I'm going to just assume that I know exactly what it looks like. So there's your truth on your side. There's my truth on my side. There is the real truth somewhere. And then there's like the truth we've come to somewhere in the middle. Right. Wow. But we can never fully know that person's side. We can never assume until we are engaged with them and having those conversations where we're getting much more than an email, especially when it comes to conflict. I mean, when it comes to really any communication, but especially when it comes to conflict, we're averse to handling that personally. And I think that is a major culture killer.
Completely. So my rule of thumb is there's 3 things you should basically never do in media, using media, if you can possibly help it. And they're interrelated. And my 3 are trust, creativity, and conflict. So if we need to develop trust, I mean, so, to be totally honest, we're doing this mediated conversation today. And the only reason I said yes is I met you in person and we had a conversation in person, and we built a kind of trust that when your email came 2 years later that said, hey, I'm now doing a podcast, would you like to join? I'm like, oh, I absolutely would, because in that conversation we had in person, trust was developed by the kinds of questions you asked, the way we interacted. And I'm like, I trust this person. I'd love to do more with them. So you can build on trust in a mediated way. You can build on trust, right? But it's much harder to build trust. Creativity is when the existing rule sets don't apply. So a lot of life, I picked this up. There's a theorist, he's retired now, named Roger Martin from the University of Toronto. And he has this idea of algorithmic thinking, heuristic thinking, and then I forget what he calls it there, but it's basically mystery thinking. So algorithmic thinking is like it's applying a rule over and over. Like, I'm going to, follow the rules. And there are cases where that's absolutely the right thing to do. Certain bureaucracies, that's almost your whole job in some bureaucracies, to follow the rules. Heuristic thinking, which is a kind of a fancy word, is when you have to figure out which set of rules apply. In other words, you're looking at a problem and you're like, oh, is this a problem A or problem B? But the third type is when it's a mystery and no rule sets apply. And frankly, a lot of life is like this, and all the most important parts of life are like this. And that's when you have to be creative. You've got to sort of feel your way through the possibilities, imagine something new. And for people to do that together, I just have found being in person makes all the difference. It's so hard to have genuine creative breakthrough in a mediated way. And then conflict, which is, competing instincts about what matters or, whatever. Terrible to do that. Do not do that over text message. Like, I text my wife about the groceries, logistics, like sure, mediate the heck out of the logistics, but do not mediate conflict. And they interact, because the more you navigate conflict together successfully, the more you build trust. The more trust you have, the more you're able to take the risks that lead to creativity. But creativity often generates unexpected results which lead to conflict. Like, they all go back and forth. And I actually think if you do those things together, Many other things. You can build systems that mediate in different ways and make it more efficient and scale and all the things that modern work requires. But you've got to do those things in real time with the real embodied person who will give you information you can't get any other way.
And don't you crave that? Like, I just crave that. Like, I have a picture, you're talking and I'm like imagining like me and others like in a room, solving a problem in real time. And I think the real time is a big part of it, because when you have a Zoom call that's an hour long, like nothing is more stressful than as creatives or, people who just are coming up with ideas or solutions to problems. Like, you have to do it in an hour together, like on a Zoom call, and then you have to move to the next meeting or the next family obligation or whatever. And I think nothing is more stifling to creativity than the restraint of time. And that's what mediated conversations do.
Interesting. Well, and I also think, I mean, I work in a remote first organization. We have 22 employees now. About 8 of them are in one place, but the rest of us are scattered across the country, the US. So we do a lot of stuff on Zoom, but I will say, I don't think I've ever been in an hour-long Zoom meeting where I was more energized at the end of the hour than at the beginning. That is, usually energy dwindles. Whereas I've been in lots of meetings in person that are an hour long, and at the end of the hour, you are more excited, like you're canceling other things so you can keep going, or you're just walking out of the room like, oh my gosh, that was so fun. Like that happens. It doesn't happen. Obviously, it doesn't happen in every meeting, even in every creative meeting. But I've never had it happen. I truly think I've never had it happen on Zoom. It's just an energy draining medium. I wonder if actually media are energy draining, whereas presence is energy, producing or energy releasing. So yeah, and it's because we were made for the in-person. I mean, really, not primarily for the mediated.
Yeah. And there are plenty of companies who are successful that have to work fully remotely. Like this is the nature of our time, right? Where they can get things done, but there will always be something missing. And there has to be an extra measure. I talk to a lot of leaders who lead remote teams. I led a remote team when I was working for the last organization I worked for. And it just takes a lot of effort, right? It takes creativity to think about how can we capture as a team together what we lose by the casual, unstructured nature of being in a workplace together, right? Like those water cooler conversations or whatever it is, those passing by conversations that are not on the agenda of a Zoom call. And when you lose that, it becomes more challenging to have like that synergy, or even like as you talked about in The Life We're Looking For, your more recent book, you talked about flow, and like that kind of that beautiful place where you're not shortchanged for a quick result. And I think that's just the nature of remote work sometimes, is the Zoom call has to get that quick kind of, as you put it, like this like superpower moment. Actually, how about you talk about that? I'm speaking from having read your book, but my audience might not have. So can you speak to that? Like, wanting that quick win from the less input, or, that superpower way versus flow.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Yes. I hope this is not a digression. I'm not actually sure I believe there are truly successful companies that are entirely remote.
Okay.
If there are, they are doing very technical things, and there are very technical things to be done in the world. But I mean, for one thing, the big companies are all calling people back to the office, often against great resistance from people who probably would rather just skate along and well, we all know, maybe some of the reasons, but gosh, I don't know. I don't think long-term competitive advantage, that is having something you can do better than anyone else sustainably, I can't imagine anyone's doing that without time together. Now, it doesn't have to be all the time. It doesn't have to be in an office. I mean, for our team, we're only all together 5 times a year, but we think so carefully about that time, and it's several days, 5 times a year, and it matters as much as anything else we do, even though if you count the hours, it's not a huge amount. But if you do trust creativity and conflict in those times, then you can really sail the rest of the time, even remote. Yeah. So now to the question you wanted me, the thing you wanted me to talk about. Yeah, superpowers. It's this really common word right now. In the tech world, I did this inventory when I was writing this book, because I have a section in it on the dream of superpowers, and I started looking for all the different like products or services or websites or software as a service type companies that promise you superpowers, and you'd be amazed at how often that's the thing people turn to explain. If you use this tool, you will have coding superpowers, marketing superpowers, leadership superpowers, whatever. And what is that a promise of? It's a promise of kind of outsized return with minimal effort. It's amazing effect with no exertion. And it's really, I think it's very connected to another word that comes up a lot with tech, which is magic, the sense of like instant, effortless power. And we really do have things like this in our world, like where you just push a button and stuff happens. Mm-hmm. But the difference between that, and I'll say it can be quite delightful. So, a friend of mine just sent, I'll give you two musical examples today. I sat down at lunchtime and for about 15 minutes worked on a Beethoven piano sonata. Specifically, I worked on like 4 bars that have these really tricky triplet runs in the left and right hand that you are supposed to play really fast, and I can't. So I played them really slow because that's what practicing is, right? I did that for maybe 20 minutes at my lunch break today. Then a friend sends me a recording of an artist and a song. So then I cue that up just a few minutes ago before we got on. And I'm listening to this amazing music, right? That made by this amazing musician who I happen to know the guy. Now, which of those is a more appealing experience? Absolutely pressing play on Spotify and hearing like an incredible professional musician do their thing is the instantly rewarding, and it is a superpower. Like I can get this artist to play for me. I can get any artist I want. I mean, almost. I think Bob Dylan is not on Spotify maybe, but everybody else is. I can get them to play for me whenever I want. Like that's incredible, right? But the only way you will experience what the psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi calls flow, which is the deep participation in making something happen in the world that is so compelling that you often lose track of time a little bit. You get deeply immersed in it. You discover possibilities that were not there before. You actually neuromuscularly change as you do it, whether you are riding a bike or practicing an instrument or, doing laps in a pool, you can have this experience. And that is rewarding, not instantly, but deeply rewarding in a way that just pressing a button is never rewarding. So those 20 minutes, they start out very tedious because I'm just playing the same thing over and over, like to a metronome. But by halfway in, even though it's only 20 minutes, by the 10-minute mark, I'm so deep into this work of listening to the music I'm making, hearing the mistakes, hearing the fault, like what's not working, fixing it, working on it. And you come out of that time, you're like, that was actually worthwhile. Like that was worth doing. And I won't say it's not worthwhile to listen to recorded music, but the way you become a different kind of person who can actually make something worthwhile is you do the flow things, not the superpower things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it was funny because I was reading that portion of your book while on an airplane. And you talk about...
Which in one way is a superpower. You're just flying from one place to another, but you aren't doing anything. Just right. It's magical.
Right. It's magical. You get there quickly, which is magical, but you lose everything in the process, right?
Yes.
Like your autonomy, your ability to get up, to sit down, to enjoy the flavors of food because of the altitude. Like you do this. And, I think this directly applies to workplace culture. I really do, because I experienced this personally in my temptation as a leader to see outcomes, even to see problems that need to be fixed, and say, like, what we need to do is that, like, we need to get there. And so in order for me as a leader to get there, I need to tell these people what they need to do. I need to make sure that my way, my opinion, my decision reaches that outcome because this is on me, as opposed to really doing the deep work of connecting with your people, empowering your people. And that is a slow process, like building connected workplaces. And, you know, I've coached leaders before who have said to me, and I get it, I don't fault them for saying it, but it really is telling, is, you know, I wish I could just hire a person to do the connecting part because I have so much to do.
I've got so much outcomes to drive.
So many outcomes to drive. Yes, that
gosh.
So much to do in that I wish I could hire someone who could care for my people. Right. Who could like make sure they're good, who can like learn their career goals.
I got it.
And all of those things. But what's funny is when we slow down and we take the time to even find that flow with our people, right? Then the outcomes happen.
Yes,
like they happen.
And things happen that you couldn't even have planned for or imagined because people's creativity is unlocked.
Yes.
Yeah. So I have two thoughts about this. So one is I think this airplane metaphor really works for the workplace because why did you get on that airplane and have this cramped, narrow, constraining, deadening kind of experience? You did it because of an outcome, which was to get somewhere quickly, right?
Yep.
And I just a couple of days ago, I took 2 long haul flights in a row. I was in Cape Town, South Africa. I flew through London. Wow. So right in a row, I flew Cape Town to London, 12 hours, London to Philadelphia, 8 hours. I will tell you, when people get off those planes after that length on a plane, now a miracle has just happened in a sense. Like I was in Cape Town and 24 hours later, I'm in my house because of these long flights, right? So in one sense, amazing outcome, like incredible thing we can do and almost take for granted in our world. But man, I really was thinking about this when I got off the plane in London, because that's the overnight flight, 12 hours overnight. And I'm like, we're all walking into the customs hall or whatever. And I'm looking at this line of people I'm in, all have been on this plane. It's like the zombie apocalypse has happened, right? And so you got your outcome at the expense of completely depleting the people. Mm-hmm. And does that not sound like a lot of companies at their worst? Yes. Like, yeah, you got the result, but look at what you've done to the people. And could that group of people have done anything creative after those 12 hours of exercising their superpowers and having this miracle of airplane flight happen? No, like we could barely get our names out properly to the customs of the border people. So it's the trade we are so tempted to make, which is get things done at the expense of people. But the problem is you can only do that a few times, and then you wore them out. And if they have an option, if they have an exit, they'll leave. The other more kind of more relevant maybe, or less of a metaphor, but a real story that I have found very moving is what happened when Mike Ullman took over JCPenney. So Mike Ullman was an executive with an incredible career. He was the chair of the board of Starbucks for a long time. I happened to have a personal connection with him. We were not friends, but we knew each other and had a few times together over the years. And just a few months ago, Mike died at the end of a long and in some ways very hard life. Mike had a learning disability that almost prevented him from ever getting out of college. So kind of an incredible story of just persevering through a college education when he really couldn't keep the words straight as he read. And then later in life, as he took on this JCPenney job, and I don't think this is irrelevant, he developed a degenerative nerve condition in his spine that made it extremely painful for him to walk. And it got worse over the years. And by the time he took over JCPenney, having been at LVMH, the big luxury goods company, in a senior role, he takes over JCPenney at a time when it also, frankly, has a degenerative condition. It's a mall-based department store in an economic era when that's going out of favor, and it had not been necessarily managed best, and there was probably a lot of chasing outcomes at the expense of people, and the culture was a mess, and the stock was a mess, and the balance sheet was a mess, and Mike, for whatever reason, felt answered the call to take on leading this company as its CEO. And the first thing he did, Kara, the first sort of initiative he took was to spend 18 months with a couple of team members, meeting every manager. This would have gone, I don't know the company structure, but they met with about 500 or 600 people who represented kind of the leadership structure of this huge corporation. And what they did, it was exactly what you were saying. People say they want somebody else to do it. They actually sat down with them in small groups and said, what is your vision for your life? Write out, tell us your mission statement for your life. Let's do a process where you kind of discover more of what you really dream of. And Mike was personally in, the CEO is in each of those sessions. And so it's not just his direct reports, like his 12 or whatever. He's meeting with people who are like, deputy regional manager for the Southwest. And he's spending, I think it was 24 hours with these folks asking this question. No one had ever done that to these people at any level of the organization. They just had a job. Suddenly, the CEO is bringing some very talented partners in and listening to you for 24 hours to get to know you. That company turned around under Mike the first time he was CEO in a spectacular way. It was the only department store that went through this turnaround. All of its peers just kind of had this long decline and all now in bankruptcy. And so is JCPenney. But during the time Mike was leading it, it turned around. And it turned around so amazingly. They brought someone else in, this like real high flyer after Mike, who this is sort of in the weeds, and I won't name the guy, even though you can go look up his name. But he was a superstar. He'd led a really powerful retail initiative for Apple, and he came in. Whatever his talents were, the thing he didn't have was any ability to relationally connect, and everything Mike had built kind of collapsed under his successor. And then they brought Mike back. They were like, "You've got to come back."
Yeah,
and he's made all the money he needs to make. He's had all the success he needs to have. He really was a servant, and I think he felt like I need to try to serve again. But that turnaround under his first era of leadership, which was 15, 20 years of leadership, if I remember correctly, just an amazing story. And it was all about paying attention to people. I mean, really amazing, really amazing.
Yeah. My husband and I joke sometimes that my entire podcast is really just like, be a nice person. It's like there's more to that, obviously, but it's not complicated, right? The point is like that story just shows that, I'm sure there were a lot of business strategies and tactics that people were saying this is like, proven and all this, but he took the time to say, well, first we're going to focus on the people, and we're going to focus on making those connections where people are valued, seen, and heard, because that is, primarily what we long for as humans.
Totally. And I'm sure that he was doing, that wasn't the only thing he was doing. That was the first 180.
He has a job.
First year. I'm sure they did lots of strategy and made lots of, good, careful decisions. But on top of or building on trust. And trust is built when you know people. That's how you do it. And if you're a leader, like you can't delegate it. You've got to have the trust. You can't. Good. That's not HR.
Yeah, you can't. And so with that, let's just transition to talk about canopies of trust, because I love this. Yeah. So what can you explain in your book? You talk about a canopy of trust, kind of explain that concept, and then maybe give some practical application for a workplace leader.
Yeah, I started thinking about this. I was thinking about this economist. I believe his name is Ronald Coase, but his last name is definitely Coase. Coase won a Nobel Prize for work on what he called the theory of the firm. So the firm being like the company, the corporation. And the basic question is, why do we have them from an economics point of view? Because we could all just, meet in the marketplace and trade our services. Like, oh, you're an accountant. I need some accounting done today. But why do we become employees? Why do we build these firms? Yeah. And there's many different ways to answer that. And Coase had his own analysis. But one way of thinking about it that is compatible with his work is that when you join a firm, you join a kind of umbrella, I think of it sometimes, under which you trust each other. And the firm exists to help you build trust with each other. And one of the most fundamental ones is, you're coming back tomorrow, mostly. Now, some days some people show up and there's someone at the door, and that's like the worst way to end a job. And hopefully none of us will have to do that kind of termination. But until you're terminated, there's this expectation that we're coming back each day. And it turns out that is massively important economically. That if you and I have to renegotiate our contract every day, there's way more friction. You can kind of imagine, like, how would you ever get anything done? You say, exactly. But it's not just contracts or terms of employment. It's like, are we going to go somewhere together? And the answer with the firm is, yes, we are. You're an employee now. Until one of us decides otherwise, we're together in this. And this got me thinking about how all generative human activity, that is all that we do that creates good in the world, it happens under these little umbrellas of a kind of promise made and a promise kept. So we're recording a podcast right now. We set it up a couple months ago. And of course, we're as we talked about earlier, we're basing it on a relationship that was formed in another setting where we built some trust and got a connection, right? So then you email me and I say, yeah, I'll be there at such and such time and we'll record. Well, that creates this canopy, or this little, I like the umbrella image, but I didn't want to call it umbrellas of trust. That felt too weird. But you and I sort of get under this umbrella together. And what does the umbrella say? It says, for this hour or so that we're together, we're going to be paying attention. I'm going to show up as best I can to listen to you, to offer what I've got. You're going to show up with some questions and some contributions of your own. And under that, we're able to create something. Now, this is a very small umbrella. And when we're done, we'll go our separate ways because we don't work for the same firm. But when I go to work, as I was in our office in person yesterday, even though I often work remotely, I walk in and it's a larger canopy, right? So there's more people under that canopy, for one thing. I work for a 22-person firm, and there's a longer horizon, like we're together for longer. And under that, we can do stuff that you couldn't do under an hour-long canopy with just two people. When you start to think about it, you realize all the good we do in the world is under like a whole bunch of umbrellas. So you go to work in your office, let's say, if you have an office, and you're under an umbrella, but that umbrella is in, say, a city, and a city is another umbrella where there are services, there's protection, there are certain expectations of like what's going to be provided. The trash is going to get picked up, the electricity is going to stay on, whatever. That city is part of, in the US, a state, that's part of a nation. And all of these are umbrellas that need to be tended so that the trust can cascade down. So things like the rule of law are part of this also at the largest level, but also keeping contracts between, say, vendors and customers is another way you keep the canopy intact. And it's under all these mesh or cascade of umbrellas that we do the creative work we need to do. Because if trust is disrupted, the first thing that goes is creativity. If you are under threat, and probably folks listening, some have had the experience of being in some very, very threatening situation. It could be a car crash. It could be a threat of violence. Like all you are in is fight or flight, and either get out or resist or do whatever you can. But you're not in a position to create. So all creativity has to be under these umbrellas. And that means that in some ways, job one of every leader, from the firm all the way up to the nation, the first job is create a canopy of trust. Not just first as in check it off the list, but like job number one every day, all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if there's a leader listening right now who understands the concept, but doesn't know what to do tomorrow towards that end, what would you say? What would you recommend?
Well, I think there's 3 ways. Let me count. I'll count as I say them. There's basically, so trust is built, and I'm getting this from a psychiatrist named Curt Thompson, who's a friend of mine, an amazing author and teacher. And I'm adapting Curt's idea a little bit, but it's been really helpful. Curt says that all trust is built through processes of rupture and repair. So the basic way that we learn to trust each other is through some rupture that breaks something. I'll give a couple examples in a moment. And then the work to then repair it. So the first one, actually, the first level is absence and presence. So you asked, you're going into work tomorrow. Well, the good news is just by going tomorrow to work, you have built a little bit of trust, because this is the first thing we all encounter as babies. Usually the strongest bond for an infant is with the infant's mother. And when mom goes out of the room, does she come back? That is a big deal to a baby.
Yes.
And I remember my daughter in particular had a second sense for when her mom was in the house but not in the room. And she always wanted her back in the room, if she was in the house. Somehow when Catherine left the whole house, like to go on a shopping or something, Amy was okay. But the moment mom was in range, she wanted mom present, right? So mommy's gone away. Is mommy coming back? The answer almost always, thank goodness, is yes, she is. Yeah. And that builds trust. And then kids start playing with this too. So the toddler runs away from the parents and then looks around to see if they're watching and then runs back. And it's this practice of absence and presence. So the first layer is we part from one another, say at the end of the day, but we come back. That actually, do not underestimate that. The fact that my team that I work with at Praxis, that 4 times a year in our team meetings and then a couple other events that we do, we've all been away, but we all gather. And it's like, hey, we're here again. And yesterday I was up in the office in New York for a day. I walk in, people are like, oh, Andy, I'm happy to see them. They're happy to see me. We haven't seen each other for a couple of weeks or maybe months for some of those team members. And it just creates trust. Hey, you're back, right? So first thing is just show up.
Show up.
So second level is failure and recovery. So this is when something goes wrong in our environment that we have to recover from. You're driving somewhere with a friend or a spouse or whoever, and you get a flat tire. Oh my gosh, what do we do? Where's the spare? Where's the pump? And you make it. And at the end of that, you trust each other more because you saw how each other reacted to the trouble and you made it through and now you have a story to tell, maybe.
Yeah.
So that's an incredible opportunity to build trust. So I think, first thing to do as leaders, just show up tomorrow. The second is actually go to the failures. So the thing that will build trust is if you demonstrate to the people you're leading that you are not afraid of confronting things that aren't working, that you're willing to hear what's broken, and that you're willing to be part of finding a way to recover, that's so important. Now, there's a third level. It's 3: absence, presence, failure, recovery. And then the third, and I'm going to use religious language, but I think it applies even if people are not people of faith, is sin and forgiveness, which are heavy terms. But sin basically means it's not just a failure in the environment. It's actually, I failed and it's my fault. That is, I did something, either commission or omission, we sometimes say. Like I either committed something against you that I shouldn't have, or I omitted to do something that I was responsible to do. And in religious setting, we'd call that sin. When you take responsibility for what was your fault that you did or failed to do, and when you can create an environment where the other person is able to say, yes, that was wrong, and yes, that did hurt, and I forgive you, and I'm willing to work to repair our relationship, that's the most powerful source of trust. Now, we all wish that didn't exist. And I think, frankly, a lot of organizations try to pretend everything's just failure and recovery. But the truth is, like, the things that go most deeply wrong and that also get most deeply healed in a way are when someone is at fault, but rather than just ejecting them from the system, which there are some things that you can't, in an employment context, you can't recover from. But there are many that just, we are going to hurt each other. And it's going to be our fault sometimes. And when we can say, and when leaders do this, it's so powerful. I am sorry. I should not have, that was a mistake. Or I overlooked that and it was my responsibility to notice that and I didn't, and I'm sorry. And when we create an environment where the other person can say, it did hurt and it was wrong, and I forgive you, oh my gosh, you now have trust like you haven't had before. So what do you do tomorrow? You show up and you start asking, not as inquisition or as like blame, but like as recovery, in a recovery seeking mode. You say, what's not working today? Or what we sense is not right? and how can I help? And then if you sense, you start to realize, I've committed or omitted, or someone has committed and omitted against me, and I can actually model forgiveness. I can say, that was not so great what you said in that meeting the other day, but I forgive you. I still want to work with you. I still want to find ways to have this be productive. That's what you do.
Yeah, that's really, really great and encouraging. And I do it all too often on this podcast, and my audience knows it. And every time I do it, I say, I'm sorry to do it. I'm just going to do it again. Is that, a giant context of my life is parenting. And, I too often compare leadership to parenting. And again, I clarify that It doesn't mean that the workplace is a family or our employees are our children. I have to give all those things. People get mad. But the point is that I think about, like, as a parent, I look at my children when they hurt each other, right? Like when they do something that they know was an offense against their sibling, and I expect them to, or I hope that they will feel genuine remorse. That they will feel genuine remorse, but not only that they will turn away, right? That they will change. That because my 3-year-old is so good at the sorry, like, sorry, I said I was sorry. I said I was sorry. Like, it's like, but sorry means you won't do it again, and we expect this of children, but one of the best ways to teach our children to do this is to do it
to
them. I'm impatient with my children regularly. There are things that they can see in me. And so modeling this, mom struggled to be kind tonight to everyone around the dinner table. I wanted dinner done on time. You were all kind of in my space. And, as a result, I didn't act kindly towards you. And I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And that will do way more for them in the long run than me policing their reconciliation.
Yes, totally. Totally.
And I think the same thing in the workplace is that if I am as a leader am willing to call out the times I have an offense towards someone, big or small, and pursue that resolution and that reconciliation, that will do far greater things long term, not for our glory or anything like that, but for the genuine good of the organization, than policing these little conflicts that we see and hoping that people can get it right. And so it's just modeling. It's just doing it yourself and taking on the servant attitude of really, my employment here or my leadership here is about you as my employees and caring well for you, and that will do our company good.
Yeah.
So,
it's so humbling to do that.
Totally.
I just think, as you describe it, I'm like, I thought I just was working a job here. And then you realize, no, I have to become a different kind of person to succeed at this level. And it's the most humbling, but also the most beautiful thing we got to do.
Yeah. And I think that is the unashamed challenge, is like, I challenge you leaders to call yourself to a higher standard when it comes to why you show up for the job, and there are a lot of people who do think, I show up for a paycheck or I show up for this position and I shouldn't be asked of anything else. And I say there's a higher standard, and I challenge you to raise the bar and do more. So I have one more question for you, Andy, and this is just a fun, personal kind of question. I listened to another podcast and he asks this question, and I have not asked anyone this question. I think I've been saving it for you without knowing.
Okay.
Because I really can't wait to hear your answer. And that is, someday when you are no longer living, if you could make sure that your children, who are now older, your kids are like young adult or adults, in their 20s, could remember just one thing, like one thing that you said, like kind of your golden rule, if nothing else. And of course, like, this is a really high stakes question at the end of a podcast after you've been thinking. So it doesn't have to be the thing. I really struggle when people are like, what's your favorite ice cream? I'm like, can I give you 5 favorites? Like, can I give you the ones I like? So it doesn't have to be the thing, but what's one thing that if they forget, like, all the things you taught them over the years, what would be something you hope sticks?
Well, there's this famous thing that Maya Angelou said, which is, they'll never remember what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And the easy thing to say, I hope my children will feel loved. I heard a version of this that I thought was really powerful, which was, what will your grandchildren tell their children about you? So the great-grandchildren who will in all likelihood never have met you, certainly won't remember you. Like, what will their parents, when they're like 20 years old, say, oh, your grandfather was, or your great-grandfather was, ... So I think there's a version of that. So then, of course, the easy thing to say is, I hope they felt loved, right? Mm-hmm. Which I do. I do hope they felt that way. But actually, there's two things that come to mind. One is something I said that I think my daughter is going to remember that I did not think she was going to remember at the time. So I'll say that in a second. But what I hope they feel, the feeling I hope they remember is laughter. I hope, because I will say in public, I laugh a lot with a lot of people. When I'm on stage, people laugh. I love to laugh. It's definitely, but I will say home was sometimes for my kids the place where dad was tired and sad, to be totally honest, in a way that probably the public never saw. But I hope what my kids will tell their kids and that their kids' will tell their kids is something about laughing. Because I think laughter is only human beings do it, really. And maybe only we can know how hard the world is and still respond with that. So that is what the feeling I hope that will be retained. When my daughter was in high school, like most high schoolers and most high school girls, she went through some tough things. And I would tell her day after day, I was like, Amy, there is someone there today at your school who's having a harder day than you are. And you can love and serve them, and try to just trust that God will take care of you. It's hard for me not to frame this in religious terms, because this is how I see the world. That God will take care of you so that you can be there for that kid who's having a harder day than you are. And I will tell you, as near as I could tell when she was 14, 15, 16, like this went nowhere. It flatlined, no response. But she's now 24, and she and I wrote a book together about technology and family stuff. And we do these dad-daughter events, which have been some of the great joys of my life. And she'll, people ask her questions. And they're like, well, what did your dad tell you that really mattered? The crazy thing is, in one of these interviews, she's like, oh, one of the most important things my dad said to me was, there's someone having a harder day than you. I'm like, I really did not think that penetrated or made any difference at the time, but it stuck. And that invitation to compassion, I would hope my kids remember that and are living that out with their own kids and their kids' kids and whoever else they are in life with.
That's amazing. I love that you shared that. And I think that's great encouragement for all of us. It's always going to be someone who's having a harder day than us in our workplaces, in our lives. And, as leaders, I think it's an important thing to think about too. And we can get all weird. I guess I don't know if weird is the right word about like legacy or those things. But the truth is, leaders are people of influence, and so as people with the responsibility and the privilege of influence, what do we want our employees looking back 10 years later and remembering about our influence and the difference that we made? And so I think those are beautiful words and encouraging and challenging. So, Andy, it is always just like rich soul food. I was so excited for this conversation, obviously for my audience to hear, but really just to be spoiled by sitting here and hearing from you personally. Having just time with you today is a true gift. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you.
Wow, what an awesome conversation. I loved it when Andy said that our number one job as leaders is to create canopies of trust in our workplace. And without that, we cannot expect creativity and community and a thriving workplace culture to happen. So what should we do? As he said, what should we do tomorrow? We should show up. We should lean into those failures and build collaborative environments where we can problem solve together. And we should be first as leaders to move forward in conflict resolution by being willing to say, I'm sorry. So, what is keeping you from really intentionally working towards building canopies of trust in your workplace? I would love to hear from you. You can leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube, or you can email me at kara@heykaralist.com. I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would love it if you liked it on YouTube, or you can leave a rating and review if you're listening on a podcast platform. I'm so grateful for Andy. I hope you were just as encouraged and challenged as I was in this conversation. Okay, friends, as always, I'm cheering you on, and I'll talk to you next time.